If you listen to the show, you already know that we cannot exist without our sponsors. They are the ones who make things happen behind the scenes. So let's acknowledge Fuji Sports. We've been working with these guys for a while now, not only as far as this podcast is concerned, but also at the RŌL Academy. We've had their gear. I personally use their gis. What a phenomenal product.
Yeah, I mean, Jiu Jitsu, Judo, MMA, tape, bags, anything you need for your Jiu Jitsu journey, you can find at fujisports.com.
Let's talk RŌL TV. There's so much content on there. It's ridiculous at this point. But I think what is even more intriguing, as time went on during the project, we've been recording most of the events that were taking place here at RŌL Academy. At this point, I mean, we have guys like Chris Howder, Armin Fati, Rafael Lovato Sr., and Pete the Greek. I mean, there were so many different events that we've kind of recorded it. Don't you think that's amazing? I mean, points of reflection and kind of going back for all the students to see what really happened and refresh their memory.
Yeah, I think it's great, you know, being able to go back and look at all these high-level practitioners, Octavio Kudo, like one of the names you didn't mention. And I mean, just these guys that have been doing this for so long come in, teach these amazing seminars and workshops, and it's all recorded and there for you to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to get additional savings on all this, type in code RŌL Radio at the coupon and get additional 30% off of your membership.
Nice. Go to rolacademy.tv. What's up, everyone, and welcome back. If you haven't already, please remember to hit the like, share, subscribe, download, listen, and whatever other button there is, and leave us a review wherever you do listen. That ensures that we can continue bringing you the great guests and amazing content you have come to expect. Today's guest is a double black belt. He is a 6th Dan in Judo and a black belt in BJJ. Shintaro Higashi has excelled in multiple martial arts and was raised under two vastly different training philosophies. His father was a native of Japan, and Shintaro was raised here in the United States. Shintaro discusses how that upbringing forged his current training philosophy, why judo is so popular around most of the world, and what holds judo back from being popular here in the U.S., and what he believes the future holds for both judo and BJJ. Here's the RŌL Radio with owner and instructor at Kokushi Budo in New York City, 2-time National Judo Champ, 2-time World Team member, and a former top 50 judo competitor, Shintaro Higashi.
Welcome to RŌL Radio.
How are you, Barry?
I'm great. Today's going good. Everything at the academy's
No
going
panic?
good. No, I don't panic. You know me.
I don't know about that.
Cool as a cucumber. You know, we don't have to get into it today, but at one point we got to tell that story where I chased the dude out of my driveway. That was fun. I don't know. We'll do it on a takeaway. Not during a regular episode. We'll do it on a takeaway.
But I think today is going to be interesting. I was looking forward to this conversation. Sensei, great to have you on the show. What a phenomenal, time that we can actually interact here. But right off the bat, I want to ask you something that I heard you say in somewhere online in one of the videos, and you said, flashy techniques are phenomenal, but do they really work? Fundamentals, or where's that? Fundamentals are the key. I would love to get your perspective on this. How come today we have so many flashy things, whether jiu-jitsu or judo, right? So you come primarily from judo background, right? But you are familiar with jiu-jitsu and other arts, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But how come there was so much flashy stuff out there, and yet longer we train, more we recognize that the core, the basic, the fundamentals is really where's that.
Yeah. So I think it all starts with the basics and the fundamentals, and the issue with that is everyone knows the same stuff. Everyone knows, right, framing and outside passing, inside passing. And for judo, it's gripping right first right, gripping right first left. So when everyone's trying to master the same sort of basics or the fundamentals, everyone has a good concept and a good grasp of sort of the fundamentals of judo or whatever concepts that you're working on. Every now and then when you throw something completely outrageous that's very flashy, that deviates sort of from that norm, it's such a shock, and it could potentially work really, really well. And then, it has this like super aesthetic sort of a thing, but only after you learn sort of the basic norms can you break those rules and then go and deviate into some of these like flashy things, right? So there is sort of like this symbiotic thing, you stay true to the basics, you do some flashy stuff. You stay true to the basics, you deviate over here, and it sort of becomes like a pattern breaker. You know what I mean? Most of the time when you have two jiu-jitsu guys interacting, you reach for the collar and you sit guard. You reach for the collar, sit guard, and then maybe the third or fourth exchange, as they're sitting guard with the collar, you go for a diving armbar, right? Like a flying armbar on the collar hand as the person sitting guard. Or even the person engaging in the guard pulling can fly into a juji or a flying triangle, right? So it's only with full understanding of the basics can you kind of deviate and do flashy things, and which ultimately is great for the sport. You can't just have flashy things, so they kind of have sort of their own place. You know what I mean? I'll say like 90-10 split, maybe even
90 fundamentals, 10 flashy.
Yeah, maybe even 95-5. Depends on who you are, what your online presence looks like.
Yeah.
If you want to pad your Instagram reels and things like that,
But this is what I'm asking, because today we do live in this very media focused and oriented world. I mean, even us having this conversation, I mean, it is a stimulating, visually stimulating, interaction. And some of these flashy things drives the attention, right? But there's this almost like a contradiction. Like flashy things are cool, but this is not what we should focus on. So I think many students out there, whether judo or jiu-jitsu, it doesn't matter actually, in my opinion, which sport, but they gravitate towards the flashy stuff, yet the fundamentals are getting ignored.
Yeah, that's an issue, right?
It's an issue.
People get hurt, people focus on the wrong stuff, right?
Yep.
And like I said, it's after you grasp the basics, then you kind of deviate into the intermediate and the stuff that kind of like pops up. A lot of this stuff is improvised, right? You kind of know first exchange, second exchange, these are sort of the things that you're going for. These are the advantages that you're going for. And then every now and then, you jump to the other side and you pass guard in a really fast, dynamic way. Knee cut, dive in over X pass, something like this, right? So it's jab, huge right cross, something like this, So
is that mentality that you've had for a long time, or is that something that you adopted later on?
I think later on, for me, when I was younger, I was much more of a physical kind of an athlete. And for me, my father had a certain method to him, and he grew up during the 60s, right? He was born in the 30s during the war. So he had a very, very like old school judo sort of upbringing, which was like very tough guy oriented, grinding oriented. They didn't let the guys drink water at practice. You know what I mean? These kinds of crazy times.
Wait, what? Why?
Yeah. Back in like the 40s and the 50s, when my father was doing judo, they figured like giving them water during training was sort of weak, right?
Is this here or back home?
No, this is in Japan. This is in
okay,
Japan.
I just want to establish, because maybe people are not even familiar with you, right? So like, where is this coming from, right? So you were talking about old country way back in 30s, 40s,
Japan.
right? Right.
Because my father was born in 1937. So he's really one of the OGs. And during the time of Mifune and Maeda, who is the guy who went to Brazil to teach judo, right? He was part of like the later wave of people who pioneered out of Japan to spread judo globally. It was a huge global initiative to spread judo. So he did majority of his training, in the 50s and 60s, when it was really, really tough guy, and post World War II Japan, which is nothing like what it is now. Because Japan had this biggest economic boom in the 80s and 90s, right? So this preceded this. And, for context, my father, he was 8 years old when the World War II ended, right? So it's a very different time. And they didn't have the research, they didn't have the know-how, athletic science and research wasn't really a thing. So it was like, hey, you don't drink water during practice. Everyone's losing salt in their sweat, so you replenish by taking salt. So they had like a little salt stable thing like horses do on the side of the mats at Kokushi University, which is a university you might be familiar with, like Satoshi Ishii, Uchishiba. They're pumping out Olympians from there, right? And so he was part of the first wave of guys coming out of that university. And back then, they didn't allow the guys to drink water. They didn't have air conditioning, obviously. And they had salt stations on the side of the mat. And you would eat salt like in between your rounds. So he taught me judo in a very specific way. Like, hey, man, you go strong, you go hard, you got to be bigger, you got to be stronger, you got to be faster. If it's not working, you're not training hard enough, you're too weak. So I kind of developed sort of like a very athletic, physical style of judo early on, like very intuition based kind of a thing, you know. And then it wasn't until later in my age when I was outmatched physically, because you're gonna have guys who are bigger, stronger than you, and things like this. And I'm actually a pretty short guy for a guy who fought 220. Right, I'm 5'9", you know, on a good day. So it's like, yeah. So I have to compensate for the guys who are like Lucas Kripalik was somebody that I fought. You know, he's a 2-time Olympic gold medalist. He was cutting down from 260, right? And he's 6'5". So like going against guys like this who are giants, I had to really compensate, you know, and learn more skill oriented things. And that what led me to like a better understanding of the judo that I teach now.
So would you define this as part of evolution, self-evolution, where you discovered the current ways of doing things are just not working, or was this something that was adapted because of the environment you found yourself in, as training partners or coaches or so on?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. And first and foremost, my father instilled a love of martial arts, right? He was like so manly, he was so tough, he was always there coaching, and you know, you could just tell that he cared so much and he was very passionate about what he did, and he loved me very much, right? So I developed like a very strong connection to judo, and as I kept doing it, little by little, I just kept, you know, absorbing more and more things. You know, I meet coaches, I meet champions, I meet Olympians. I got to work with Jimmy Pedro, who was an Olympic medalist. As you know, I was training partners with Travis. I started wrestling in high school and college. So I had coaches who were wrestlers, wrestling coaches, you know. And there were some issues too. Like I was in a very small town local dojo for judo, but I was trying to compete on a national level, international level. So I had to make sort of accommodations for myself and find ways to train that were a little bit more creative, right? I didn't want to switch gyms and train at the National Training Center because my father trains me. I'm at his gym, you know, and I was also wrestling in college at, you know, in Manhattan. So it was like, I had my team, I had my people, but I was always sort of the better person in the room always. And that kind of led me to take training approaches in a different way, you know, and that ultimately helped me a lot. You know, I got creative, and then I started seeking higher level coaches when I started entering in the international phase of judo, right? The international circuit, the IJF circuit, right? And then when I started teaching,
and so that's the interesting part, right? The evolution that takes place. And I think that's what's really intriguing about your story, because it almost is like going from the black and white scenarios where you have to go through these gray areas and create this adaptation for yourself in order for you to be successful, right? And we've talked to Travis, we've talked to Pedro, and like all of them shared some of these stories. Especially Travis was very interesting too, you know, overcoming some of these obstacles on his side. So this is really intriguing to hear all this. And I do want to pick your brain about this whole Olympic approach of being part of something bigger. But before we get there, go back a little bit. Your father is obviously engraving a big martial arts spirit in you, right? And all of this is growing as time goes on. Do you recall one of the earlier days you stepping onto the judo mat? Do you or was this? Or it was so early that it just was part of it? How did this feel?
You know, I remember like some of the earliest memories in school. It's like even like kindergarten, first grade. What do you want to be when you grow up? And it was like, I want to be an Olympic medalist. I didn't even know what that was, Olympian. You know, I never got there, right? But like, that was the dream, you know. And I just loved it so much, being around the guys in the gym. Going to tournaments, and you know, it was very stressful too. It was a very tough thing. You know, I remember a lot of my childhood memories is sitting in the gyms crying, you know, and I tell this story pretty often, but like, you know, I lose or something or disappoint my father in so many ways, and all I wanted to do was like make him happy, right? And I wanted to compete, and so much of my identity was tied to judo. You know, growing up, that's what I did. I was a judo guy. This is what I do.
Would you say that judo is so embedded into our culture back in Japan that it's almost difficult to avoid it?
No, I mean, you know, there's so many ways around it, right? Like if you have a judo dad and you're entering a judo program that's a competitive, and then now all of a sudden you're going to a judo related high school or middle school, then you can't get out. Once you get sucked into that system, you're done, right? Because in middle school, they recruit elementary school champions. And then you live in the dorms, starting in 7th grade, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, you're in the dorms, you know, and you're doing judo training, 6 a.m. training every single day. You go to school, but you're not doing real school. You get put in sports classes. And in those sports classes, there's a baseball team, soccer team, judo team, kendo team, right? So you got a classroom of 30 kids who are just there for athletics. Essentially, half of them are on athletic scholarship.
That's very different than what we see in the U.S.
Yes. And then that's all you do. Yeah. And there's no seasons. There's no fall semester, spring semester. I play baseball. It's a year-round thing. You're playing baseball year-round, right? There's 3 major tournaments for high schoolers. And then depending on how well you do there, it leads to the university scholarship thing. But you usually go through the whole system. Kokushikan middle school, Kokushikan high school, Kokushikan university. And then you could be a judo professional. So once you enter that system, it's over. You're just in it.
We've talked to other people who've gone through that. There's no switching, right? Once you're in, you're in. No. You're not going from baseball to judo at some point because you want to try baseball. You're locked in for good.
None of that. Yeah. You're locked in forever. Especially if you show any sort of proficiency at a young age, or if you come from a judo pedigree and you get pushed into the system, it's over. That's what you're doing, whether you like it or not.
Is that a good thing? Like, I'll put you on the spot here.
I mean, it's good for who, right? Good for pumping out champions. You go to Kokushikan University and you have 80 guys in the room, all at least minimum 2-time state champs. Every single person in that room, all killers. Every single person in every single weight class is ranked, right? You could go up to any kid, like, what weight class do you fight in? I fight, 90 kilograms, 198 pounds. What number are you? I am the 7th string as of right now. And they're going to do an inter-club thing, maybe a month and a half away. And I have to fight every single person in my weight class. And then they're going to determine what string I am, and how you get treated by the coaches, all this stuff determined on that one tournament, right? And they have them every couple of months. The top 3 guys don't have to do it though, right? So
that's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure. You're fighting for your life. You're fighting for your scholarship. And then if you're good, you get to put it on the team. And if you're on that team, now all of a sudden you have more opportunities to be a professional, right? After college, there's a pro league where a company like Toyota, or I don't know, there's like a gambling team, and there's like a Park 24, which is like a company that owns all the parking lots in Japan, and you could be hired by those guys as employees, getting a full-time salary, like an entry-level salary, and bonuses for performance bonuses. But your only job is to do judo and represent that company, right? So
I've never heard that before. That's pretty mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing. And, it's not just specific to Japan. Right, there's other countries that kind of have similar structures, right? I know guys in Italy who do judo, who became firefighters and police officers, but they're not required to run into burning buildings or like actually do policing. They're only required to do competitive judo. And in the United States too, like I had a friend that was on the wrestling team for the Marines. He was a Greco-Roman guy, and he was on the Marine wrestling team, and he didn't have to go to war or anything. He just had to wrestle.
Yeah, we've been doing that in this country for years.
Yeah, so there's like opportunities like that where you can sort of be a pro and you could have a full-blown salaried career until you're like in your mid-30s almost if you're a heavyweight.
So you go through this life. You obviously sucked into this vortex of judo early on,
Not
by
these guys,
right. So what does this look like for you? Like at which point, obviously you moved to United States, at which point, you take this on more, the switch takes place. That's what I'm interested in. From the hardcore where you're describing to this little bit more quote unquote intelligent training.
Yeah. So when you have those guys like in those rooms, right? Like middle school, high school, and there's 100 guys in the room, and every single one of them are already vetted to be there, and they're recruited and they're vying for the top spots. The cream's always just going to rise to the top. So it's like push them as hard as you can. 4 or 5 hour training sessions all the time. You're training 6 hours a day easily, right? And the people who make it out of that are going to be incredibly tough and smart and gifted, not smart like athletically smart, right? And so it's always like survival of the fittest, and there's a term in Japanese called jakuniku kyoshoku, right? It's a 4 kanji thing. It's weak people become the meat of stronger people, right?
Oh,
it's kind of a cool
that's
saying.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's like, you hear these gurus say like, hey, you walk into a room, if push comes to shove, can I kill and eat every single human in this room, right? It's kind of that kind of mentality a little bit, But I was born in the United States. So I grew up here, and watching Iowa wrestling or, high level wrestling culture in the United States, I was, in awe of this kind of like a tough man culture, right? Because it was kind of embedded into me. And then I had so much pride that I come from that lineage, from my father, right? Because he was from Kushkan. And, jiu-jitsu guys say, hey, I learned from this master. He got a black belt from this guy. And you always try to trace it back to Kano, right? Kano, Helio, this guy. Henzo's my teacher. Danaher's my teacher. But for me, it's me, my father, Aida, and then Aida learned from Kano. He's one of Kano's students, right? So we're only 4 really removed generationally, So like I had tremendous pride in that. And, when you're just a regular kid going to high school and you're wrestling and you have success in that, and that's your whole identity, winning and losing start meaning a lot.
How was this impacting you as you growing up in the United States? So obviously, listen, it doesn't take a genius to notice that what you're describing is very different culturally to what we experience here in the U.S., right? And yet you are still saying that this was embedded into you, right? And so how are you going through, elementary school, high school, all these grades, seeing that everybody else does something else, and you are really have this ingrained this very different work ethic?
It's it was kind of a weird thing because I didn't really live that life, right? My father's telling me about this stuff, and every summer I would go to Japan to train. So like I would go in the summers to train. I would see these kids getting put through the ringer. I remember like 2 summers in high school, I went 2 years back to back, and I spent the whole summer there training with the team. I lived in the dormitories and everything. And it was probably the most brutal experience I've had up until that point, And it's wild, right? You're walking down the middle school corridor and, the 7th graders just got recruited for the school year in April. And I'm there in June, and you're walking down the hallway and you hear all these kids crying, 12 years old, 13 years old, crying in their rooms, because they're just so miserable from the training, right? And then, but I had an out. Like I would stay there, train, and then I would come back to New York, right? So it was a little bit different. Like I was living it, but not really living it. But my identity was tied to it. But, I was still kind of being a regular high schooler. Like I was into like hanging out, drinking a little bit in college and maybe a lot of it, but I didn't fully like internalize all of it. And that, I was trying to make myself a little bit more well-rounded, and that was also the message of my father. Like, you cannot be a judo dummy. He would always tell me, right? You got to go to school, so he put academics also.
So even though he went through all of this, he still was telling you can go through this system machine of just focusing on judo. He embraced education and other things.
Yeah, because he was a big believer in this. That was one of his personal philosophies that, he lived this life, and it's a tough life, man. Just doing judo professionally and traveling the world, and it's great. What is the end game, really? You own a judo school one day and you pump out some Olympic champions, and even have an Olympic gold medal doesn't really set you up for life, right? Yeah. And then all the skills that make you successful, even as grapplers in the grappling economy, is these soft skills, business touch, all these different ideas, how to monetize your skill, how to monetize likability, all these different things that you may be able to scale online. You guys are doing it, right? So you guys get it. Yeah. That has nothing to do with jiu-jitsu, actually. Right?
You bring up very good points, and even reaching into coaching or leadership, like we talk about this on this show quite a bit. These are all separate skills. We're just using the environment of jiu-jitsu or judo to embrace them, right? To kind of surface them and present them, right? So at which point does this become serious for you? Because there's no doubt that there is, there is an element of seriousness, right? You have gone through a professional route of judo. You have experience of other arts like wrestling and sambo and jiu-jitsu. So you have dipped into a lot of areas. Yeah. And we'll talk about that in a second. But at which point this becomes serious?
I'll tell you, man, a lot of my under 10-year-old judo experience a lot of it was just kind of loving judo. I was forced to go to these tournaments, and I spent a lot of time crying. But, it was always like a lot of pressure and a lot of like negative stuff, but also good stuff too, right? Like we would go to the tournament, I would lose, I would crawl into the bleachers, I'd be crying. My dad would be like, yeah, get over it, stop being a little baby. But, on the way home, we get ice cream, And then we get home and like he's angry, but he gets over it, and we're bullshitting by the end of the day. And, it's something I did with my dad. You know what I mean? And he was very well respected in the community. So I would go to these tournaments and, whether I did good or not, you could see my dad being a little bit of a lunatic, but at the end of the day, people respecting him and all this stuff. And he's like, yeah, that's my pops, and I got to make that guy proud. Right. So more and more I started developing a love for it. And I was like, this is what I got to do. Right. And I think there were some key tournaments that I was able to do that kind of pushed it into the really serious side. You could identify with being a champion and this is my route, but there used to be this tournament locally called the promotional tournament, and you fight for your belt rank, which is kind of a cool thing that they did, right? And then they line everyone up in size order, and if you win and beat a certain number of guys in a row, you automatically rank up in belt.
Okay.
Right? Whether it's green to brown or brown to first level brown, second level brown, and then highest brown, you beat 3 guys in a row, you get a black belt, right? So it was this cool tournament, and my dad's like, hey, man, I know you're really young. Well, let's bring your gi, right? And you could warm up with the guys. That's what he told me, right? And I'm at this thing, and then I'm a really young kid. I'm 12 years old, right? And it's an adult tournament, right? And then he goes, I signed you up for the novice division, right? But I was like, yo, Dad, I was a big kid. I'm not like some weak 12-year-old kid. I grew up really fast. I'm 5'8" and 5'9" now. I was already 5'8", 5'9" by the age I was 12. And people thought I was going to be a giant. I just stopped growing after 12 years old, which is kind of really unfortunate. I thought people were like, this guy's going to be like 6'5", very unfortunate. But I was a big kid, and my dad was like, we're bringing your gi. And I was like, kind of had this feeling in my gut, like driving to the tournament, like, oh man, is this crazy guy going to make me fight in the adult division today? And he's like, put your gi on, warm up with the guys. And I was like, Dad, I'm not fighting today, right? He's like, no, you're just warming up the guys, get a warm up in, do drills. And then dude, he comes over and he's like, guess what? I signed you up. And man, I almost started crying on the spot, dude. And I was scared, and I fought a guy. He was in his late 20s. He wasn't good, but he was an adult, and I was 12, right? And I fought for my life. And in that tournament, you could fight them to a draw, right? Because it's only if you throw the person for a full score, you get promotion points for that. So you could fight him to a draw, and I fought him to a draw. I was literally just survival mode, right? And then they do this tournament every 6 months, and 6 months later, he's like, yo, you ready to do this? And I was 13 at the time, and, let's freaking do it. And I remember that was the moment. Yeah, and that was the moment I was like, I am not a normal 12-year-old. I am not a normal 13-year-old. I could go out there and hang with these guys. And then I got thrown on my head and got injured, right? But it was getting over that fear. It was terrifying. Could you imagine, at that age? Yeah. And I don't think you could get away with that anymore. It's borderline child abuse. You know what I mean? You can't do that. They don't allow kids now under a certain age to compete in these tournaments. And they didn't have phones, Instagram, none of that stuff. So it was a completely different world, And I think that was what really pushed me into all right, this is what I'm going to do. Right. And now,
what do you think? What do you think was about that event particularly, or that subset of events that really made you hungry for that competition factor?
There's so many tournaments out there, and this was a very well-attended tournament, and everyone wants the belt. Everyone wants a black belt. Everyone wants a brown belt, as you can imagine, right? Mm-hmm. And this tournament, you could go and compete for it. So you go in, you've been doing judo for 8 years, 9 years. You beat 3 guys in a row. You bomb the first guy, you stay on. And the next guy comes up and he's fresh and he wants to dethrone you. And you beat that guy and you're tired. And then the third guy comes on and you slam this guy, you get a black belt, right? And I've seen guys go do this. And then the joy on their faces when they throw the third guy, like, oh my God, I'm a black belt. They're freaking crying, all this stuff, all this emotion, right? I've been wanting to get a black belt for freaking whatever amount of years, but you could go there, beat 3 guys in a row and get that belt. And seeing those guys do that from the time that I was 6, 7 years old, and this was something that I wanted to do, that was the most important tournament for me. And I won junior nationals when I was 8, but it just didn't have the same feel. Junior nationals, judo, it's not that huge of a deal, and you're 8 years old, and they give you a medal and a gi. It just did not feel the same. You know what I mean? This was like my Olympics at that time, and I remember, writing promotional tournament, whatever it was called at the time, and then writing it on a sheet and putting it on my door, like all NCAA kids do, putting it in the doorway above my door. And every time I left my room, I would jump up and touch it. Like these little weird little kid things, I'd be like 10, 11 years old. And I was obsessed with it, right? And every single night I would dream about beating adults, 3 guys, and getting that black belt. So it was very special for me. And that first time I did it, man, when I was 12 years old, it was like, holy moly. I was really, really scared. And I went for it. And, I didn't win a single match there for years till I was like, maybe like 14, 15.
That second year when you got injured, a lot of people, I think, especially at that age, would have been like, no, I'm done. This isn't for me. How did you get over that?
I don't even know, man. I remember like this guy went for a drop Sanagi and I landed on my head and I like hurt my neck a little bit. And then obviously I'm on the mat crying. I'm a 13-year-old boy, right? And then like I finished the match. I can't really remember. I remember like crying, but I cried at all these tournaments as a kid, So it wasn't that huge of a deal. It's just embarrassing, and part of it's like my dad being like, come on, grow up, be a man, that kind of a thing. And part of it's like, come here, little bastard, and like, let's go get some burgers. You know what I mean? And it's just, right? It's like,
would you say that these tournaments were one of the more impactful ones in your life?
100%, without a doubt, man. And I won U.S. nationals. I won medals on the World Cup circuit. Nothing quite hit like that tournament. I remember when I freaking first degree black belt to second degree black belt, it's 5 in a row. I threw 5 in a row. I stayed up for 5 matches and got that. And it's much more poorly attended now. And it's unfortunate because back then they didn't do weight classes. They just lined you up in size order, and then you just went from one after another. And then sometimes,
really? So what do you mean by size? So everybody went with everybody?
Yeah, and this is the thing. First round, they line you up in order of size, approximate size. No one did weigh-ins or anything. People just lie about their weight. And they would go through, and winner stays on from lightest all the way to the heaviest, right? And then second round, they'll do 2 rounds of this. Second round, because like you don't want the be fighting the same guys anyway, they would scramble it and you would get somebody random. So it really benefited the heavier guys because sometimes you 220 pounds, you get like a 140-pound guy. You're like this, yes, and you smush him. And I was lucky because this like kind of goes against my case for being like a young tough kid. I was a heavy kid. I was like already 5'8". I was a child, but I was a fat kid. So I was already weighing 180, 200 pounds, And I forgot to mention the guy I fought first. He was like a good 140 pounds. I still had 50 pounds on this dude. But he was 27 years old. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was wild. And it was a Wild West. And a couple of years ago, they said, you know what? We can't have these huge weight discrepancies and people getting injured. And there was one tournament when actually one of my guys who was a collegiate wrestler, right? He went against a teenager. And he had about 80 pounds on him, and he suplexed him, right? And then it was caught on camera, and it went on Facebook, and it was an issue because people were like, why is this man allowed to fight with this boy, with his weight difference and with his age difference, right? That guy clearly has tons of wrestling experience. He literally suplexed this young child who he outweighs by 70 pounds. This has got to end, So that kind of like put a stop to this whole crazy like promotional ranking system, this tournament. They still do it, but it's not the same, It's very poorly attended.
Is that good or a bad thing?
It's good and bad both, I think. It's good. It's safer, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's for
There's
sure.
different way. Yeah, but
well, like the question comes up often, at least as I reflect on being on the mats and training jiu-jitsu for many years, 2 decades now. And it's like, some of these things definitely make things faster, I'm sorry, safer. At the same time, I feel like sometimes the old school way was like a little more fun. It was a little bit less restricting, it was
for sure.
And I'm torn about it. I don't know what to think. It's like,
that kid could have broke his neck.
Oh, I agree. 100%.
I could have broke my neck when I got thrown on my head when I was 13 years old. I could have quit judo and never looked back, So a lot of it's luck, really, and interacting with your coaches. And, my father always tied it to some kind of a eating thing. Let's get burgers after. Let's go. You want some cheese fries?
What was that a thing?
Yeah.
At burgers after? Yeah.
Burgers, ice cream. What do you want today? I'd be like, fucking pizza. Like, let's go get pizza then. Which is not the greatest thing, because now I'm always struggling. When I feel bad, I always try to go get some food. You know what I mean? That's not a good thing, right? Probably.
I deal with it all the time. My son is upset, and it's like, can I have ice cream? Can I have this cake? It's like,
One of the things that you mentioned earlier on was that, you've been brought up in a very small training environment, training with your dad, and and that created an obstacle later on when you were trying to create a diversity, right? What was the process in your mind, and like, how did you go through this? Going from small place and very personal, very engaging, to a larger place is hard. It's very different, no matter what sport you're in.
Yeah, it's tough. And like I told you, like the Kokushi system is like you got 100 guys in the room. They're all minimum state champions. A lot of these guys are like middle school national champions, high school national champions, and they make it on the cadet stage in the world. They're world cadet champions, world IJF junior champions, right? So these guys are already internationally leveled up, right? And some of these guys who are 17, 18 years old, they're already winning international level events, right? When Ishii won the Olympics, and I can't remember what year, he was in college. So you're training amongst guys who are already winning Olympic medals, right? So when you're in that environment, there's no like, hey, let's do technique today. Hey, let me show you this stuff. It's very, very different from a commercial gym where, hey, let's do technique of the day. Let me show you what's going on here. Hey, how do I get my yellow belt or green belt? It's a very different environment. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So my dad kind of came through that kind of a system where the cream just rises to the top and they just kick the shit out of each other. And he was adopting that sort of structure to the training in the room. So it was never like a hands-on, like, this is how you game for this position. This is how you set up that thing. It's never really like that, right? It's just like, hey, dude, train as hard as you can, as long as you can. And I know there's not a lot of guys in here to challenge you. So you're going to go to the gym and lift as heavy as you can and run as fast as you can, And so I kind of developed like this thing where I was, lifting weights. I was deadlifting, maybe like 565 in my peak, doing sprints and trying to be as physical as possible. So it definitely had its challenges, and asking questions for higher level coaches, and everyone kind of had a differing opinion. So little by little, I kind of came into the conclusion, like, man, I got to start developing my own opinions about technique. And that's when I started really, really thinking about grappling in a different way.
And so what was your solution to that problem? How did you come to the conclusion that training here is better versus the other place?
I don't think anywhere per se is better, right? It's what you make of it, And when you're in a room where you're better than everybody, you could slow everything down. For instance, like I was telling one of my guys just the other day, like there's this woman in the room who's 110 pounds. She's physically so weak and she's so light. If you can't take her down without using any physical ability, you could always muscle her down, right? So you got to take out all the physicality. You just have to outmaneuver her. That's it, right? With using least amount of strength. Then you're onto something technically. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like even with the passing, like if you outweigh someone by 100 pounds, you're throwing your knee shield in there and smashing the top knee and putting weight on it and then going knee. Like if you're heavier, it's easier. Right.
Well, absolutely. You're using gravity, right? You're using the physical components that you have to your own advantage.
Yes, but being ahead of the person's frames. You know what I mean? As you're passing outside, he's throwing his legs over. You're ducking it before it gets there. You're framing. You switching directions. He throws the legs and you push the legs down, using zero physical effort, but just outskilling and outmaneuvering. And then you enter a knee cut where the frames aren't in, and then you slip that underhook in. They're putting up the frames, but you're not pushing your body weight into it. You're just going around it and using your head to, clear the frames. And, you get 2 frames with the 2 arms and you use one head and then the other arm to clear both of it. And then you get chest to chest. That's amazing skill, right? So developing a judo like that. Yeah.
Go ahead. Finish.
Oh, yeah. So developing training methods like this against people who are much less skilled or much smaller and weaker, right? These are the sort of technical things that Kashiwazaki was a famous judo guy who trained and coached a high school. and he did all newaza, and he won an All Japan Championship, or maybe even Worlds, training with only high school kids. Right?
You're just refining your skills rather than relying. I mean, it happens a lot here when like a wrestler comes in. Yeah, he can mow over everybody, or most of the room. But if you tell him, okay, don't wrestle, well, now it's a different story. And watching him grow in jiu-jitsu rather than just come in here and then just come in open mat to be physical, you get to see him develop. And I think it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Is that why smaller guys are so much more dynamic when it comes to judo and jiu-jitsu? It's actually and almost any sport. And I feel like the bigger guys lean more on the physicality of it.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some truth there. If you're a smaller guy going up a bigger guy, you have to outmaneuver them and outskill them, as opposed to a big guy can use their mass and throw it around. And if you're reliant on that, and then you go out to the competition world and you get another guy that's just as big as you, and you try to outmuscle that guy, you're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
Right. So definitely makes sense. And different training rooms provide different merits. Being in that room with Travis and Jimmy Pedro, right? I'm in that room every day. I lived there for a year. Did my training up there, and it's like Jimmy Pedro is a coach. I get to work out with him. Travis is in the room. He's Olympic silver medalist. Kayla Harrison's right there, Olympic gold medalist, and I'm working out with those guys. And I'm like, you know what? Why not me?
Mm-hmm.
I'm in it with these guys. I'm training, do the same training as them. If they're having success on that international stage, I can also have success on the international stage. That gives you a little bit more belief. You have more faith, as opposed to just training in a small dojo and you think you can do it, or you kind of have this thing, right? Like, I can do it. I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
I could be the best guys, but it's not founded on anything with evidence. But if you're in the training room with guys, same training protocols, and they already have success, and you're in there competitive with them, you're like, I can freaking do it too, right?
Yeah, so definitely. Surrounding yourself by people who've done it before, it gives you the sense of confidence, even, right?
Yes,
and plus the knowledge that's being shared within the room. That's the next level stuff. Yeah. No, this is all gold as I'm listening to you. I mean, what a phenomenal the little pieces to all of this, to bring us all successful. Let me pivot this conversation a little bit. And you primarily, obviously, come from a judo background. How come judo is not so popular in the U.S.?
Hey, you cutting out.
Oh, did we lose him?
You're frozen on my end, too.
I am? I'm not. Frozen.
Well, I'm not on mine.
Oh, you guys are.
Fun.
That's going to hold on.
Shoot him a message.
Yeah. I'm frozen too.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, sorry about that.
Hey, how are you?
We lost internet for a second. Joining in. There you go. What you eating?
Little rice, little meat, vegetables. Yep.
All right, hold on.
Gary.
All right, I'm muted.
Gary is muted.
All right.
Okay. All right. I don't know where we left off the conversation. I was about to ask you that. I'm going to pivot the conversation a bit before wrapping up. But I was wondering, how come, in your mind, how come judo is not so popular in the United States? Why there is such a larger, significantly larger presence in Europe and in Asia versus the U.S.?
I think first and foremost, people don't really care about the Olympics that much. Right? It's not as visible. A lot of countries, they're not winning a ton of Olympic medals in every sport. In the U.S., track and field, swimming, there's a lot of Olympic sports that get more coverage. Well, let's just say, for instance, you look at a country like Mongolia. They won their first Olympic gold recently, and it was a judo guy. That does tremendous things for the sport in that country. All the kids who are watching this guy, right? It's like sort of a rags to riches story. You know, guy gets $1 million. Even like Russia, right? Russians care about Olympic medals, obviously, and then when they win the Olympic judo medal, they get rewarded handsomely by the government. Right? Obviously, Putin loves judo, and Putin has a hand in judo, and Gazprom is like their version of ExxonMobil. So they fund a lot of the judo athletes and things like this. So there's a lot more money in it as well, right? And here, nobody really watches the Olympics for judo, and we don't have a lot of contenders. So it's sort of like this vicious cycle, right? That's first and foremost, I think. Also, it's a lot harder of a sport to have a lot of success in. No one really cares about it on the local level, and the risk reward is the differential on that one's too big. You know, at least with Jiu Jitsu, a lot of older guys can do it. You could compete in Masters Division Worlds and say you're a world champion. Right? There's paths. Every single person who does Jiu Jitsu can have a suitable high level goal. Win Pan Ams. You could do that at your age group in your belt division, right? There is no winning Pan Ams in judo. You get one guy in your country, the best guy, going to Pan Ams, and then you go there, and it's one guy from Brazil, one guy from Canada, one guy from Mexico, one guy from the United States, and you have to represent your country and beat out Cuba, Brazil, Argentina, Canada, all these tough countries, right? So it's a much more difficult path, I think, and the injury rate is incredibly high. So it makes it very, very difficult for retention, right? Retaining people, and it's just not as many people doing it. You hit a critical mass at some point, like you get in, like, let's just say France. It's taught in the education system. There's 1 million active competitors in France alone doing judo. Do you know this?
I did not. I mean, I knew judo had a huge presence, but
they say in France alone, I think it dipped to like 800,000 or something like this. But in France alone, we're talking active competitors, right? Who are affiliated. They have like a membership to the French Judo Federation or whatever, the FJF or something like this. And they have a membership, and they're actively going to these things, right? And they have this age group can't do these moves. This age group, they can't do these moves. And they have these little things that they have. And when you have that kind of critical mass, it sort of becomes this like self-contained community.
So how come this is not happening here?
Injury rate's very high. Not enough qualified instructors. There's not enough money in it. In judo, I think they made a mistake, in the 70s when they said, we're not doing this for money. We're doing it for the love of the sport. And a lot of the old instructors had full-time 9-to-5s, and they never did it sort of as a full gig. They would go to work, and then they would do it on the side, and they would charge little to nothing. There's still dojos out in California. You could do judo monthly tuition, $30, $40, $50 a month for membership. You know what I mean? So, when you're charging such low prices, you're racing to the bottom, right? And then when you pay so little, you don't value it as much, and you're going, and the risks are really high, and the likelihood of you blowing out a knee, it's insane. I go do seminars sometimes at judo clubs. And it's like, I walk in there, it's like, how many of you guys had an ACL tear? 4 or 5 guys? You don't know, easily. Like a good percentage of the room had it. I went to one 2 weeks ago, and there was 2 guys sitting on the side. I was like, what about you guys? You guys working out? He's like, I just had ACL surgery 4 months ago. Oh, I just had ACL surgery 2 months ago. All right, was it judo or was it pickup basketball? He's like, it's judo. I did it in this room. So the injury rate's a lot higher. Impact is higher. When you're doing jiu-jitsu, you could go in, you could do half guard, you could do pressure passing. It hurts, but it's not as impactful. Right?
So with everything that you're saying, do you foresee judo fading away at some point because of these factors?
Potentially. I think judo can make it. I think the multiplier for jiu-jitsu, in terms of numbers, is probably about 7 to 10, right? So if you have average judo gym in the country, you multiply that by 7, then you get the average jiu-jitsu gym in the country, and number of participants, and the dollars that are in the United States for that economic pie. It's about 7 to 10. For U.S. specifically, I'm speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Internationally, is a whole different animal, right? So in the U.S., maybe a lot of these jiu-jitsu guys, as they're cross-training, they want to adopt more judo. They want to adopt more throwing. If you look at wrestling in Russia, those guys train together because they all do sambo, right?
Mm-hmm.
They do judo wrestling hybrid sport called sambo,
Mm-hmm.
and they train together. Even in Brazil, if you've ever been to Brazil, there's these like sports clubs that have judo teams, Brazilian jiu-jitsu teams, and they train together.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Sojipe, which is like a pretty big sports club in Brazil in Porto Alegre.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a program. They had 100 guys on the mat, and 50 of them were Brazilian jiu-jitsu guys, and 50 of them were judo guys. And they go, all right, guys, first round, 7 minutes on your feet. Second round, 7 minutes on the ground. Next one, alternating, standing, ground, standing, ground, standing, ground.
But don't you think that's how it should be? I mean,
should be.
I mean,
Yeah.
the reality of all of this is that judo jiu-jitsu came from judo. Like this stand-up component, at least in my eyes, it should be present, and yet it kind of sort of developed into what we see today, which is a lot of ground fighting, but this standing component has been ignored for whatever reason it is. But what has been ignored? Do you think that we should bring it back together in a sense of bring urgency to listen? I mean, everybody preaches. Everything stands on a fight. Every fight stands on the feet, and we need to know how to do it, and yet we don't do it.
Yeah. So let's talk about the economics, right? You guys have a gym, right? RŌL Jiu-Jitsu in Illinois, right? Who is your primary demographic?
Oh, listen. It's probably 36 to 45, somewhere around there. It's a established family,
age-wise,
right?
Yep. And you want those guys because those guys aren't transitory, right? They live in the neighborhood. They bring in their kids. They're training there. They're not moving, right? You get those guys they get for 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
You do a judo class there, run by me, right? And all right, guys, let's go full throttle takedowns. And the guy lands on the shoulder. Guess what?
Gary is gone. Gary is gone.
He's not coming back.
Hey, man, since I've stopped doing judo, I no longer have tingling in my fingers. It's like it's gone.
Yeah. Most of these guys who are coming into the gym, I'm not saying all of them, a lot of them in their late 30s, they want a place where they could be around the dudes and grapple and feel tough and do this stuff, but they don't want necessarily the risk of landing on their head. And the risks of judo are real. You could land on your head, get a concussion. People break necks in judo. That's a real thing, right? More often than jiu-jitsu, And I've been at judo tournaments and people died of a heart attack on the mat. Right, I've seen this kind of craziness. Obviously, this is not like the norm. People don't drop dead and break necks every day in judo, but the risks are much higher, right? This is the thing. You mess up in half guard, guy passes your guard, not a big deal. He goes for an arm bar. He's trying to give it a little bit too much juice. Tap, right? There's a fail safe. But if a guy has you up in there and he's losing his balance and you're about to fall on your head, sometimes you land funny and you get in.
But then, okay, so now let me ask you this. A pivotal question here. How come it's so big in France? Why is it so big in Russia? Why is it so big in Asia? But, I mean, the same issues exist, right? I mean, judo is not getting any softer just because they are in a different continent.
Yeah.
Some would argue that it's probably harder because they have, tougher talent.
Yeah. It's the equivalent to like what Russia does with wrestling and what US does with wrestling. If you look at the population of Russia and how many people actually wrestle, you can't even compare like what the ratio is of how many guys are wrestling in the United States and then right, et cetera, as compared to the U.S. population, right? There's a lot more guys wrestling in the United States compared to our population than Russia, right? So you have a much smaller population of Russia doing wrestling, actual freestyle wrestling, but they have incredible amount of success internationally, right? This is sort of like a well-known fact. But this is the thing. In the US, there's a lot more people wrestling because of the collegiate style wrestling. It's a system designed to keep kids safe. There's potentially dangerous. If you lift them up, you don't slam them down. And there's all these different rules that's different from freestyle international wrestling, right? And in France, there's no Tanya Toshi at a certain age. There's no drop Seanagis at a certain age. And they have sort of this scaffolding thing where little by little, you sort of add stuff, right? And then, there's a little bit of a sunk cost too. You spend 5 years doing judo, take a bad fall, you're not going to quit, right? It's the first 2 years that's really crucial, right? And if it's within the education system, it's just something you do during gym class.
Yeah.
You do gym class in France, you're doing judo. You're doing gym class in Japan and you're a boy, you're doing judo. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And even in Japan, they had a lot of issues with unqualified instructors teaching Osotogari and kids breaking their necks and getting concussions and dying. I think it was like 120 kids died in Japan from Osotogari alone.
Wow.
It was crazy. It was a whole study. But now they're much more careful with this kinds of stuff, but when it's in the education system, it's designed with safety first, then, it could potentially grow. And we don't have that in the United States in judo. Judo, there's a lot of isolated gyms, and these guys kind of do whatever they want. They run gyms the way they've been taught to run gyms, and they do it on the side as a hobby. And for them, they have survivor bias. Like, I did it like this, it should be like that. I know there's only 25 guys in the room, but they're going to do judo the way I did judo. Right? They're not banning Tanya Toshi. They don't give a shit. You walk in, you're a white belt. All right, guy, this is how you do a throw. This is how you do a break fall. Go try to take that guy down.
Yeah.
And then he blows his knee out or gets slammed, and he's like, I'm quitting. Forget this.
Oh,
and a lot of these places don't even do commitments. They don't even do contracts.
Yeah.
Right? So a lot of it is we need to educate the judo people who are in charge, and those guys have to do a better job educating the people who already run gyms, and there needs to be more money in the sport.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I hope it doesn't disappear.
Yeah.
I love it from entertainment perspective. I love it from studying perspective, and I think it's important. So I do hope I'm pulling for it. I hope as jiu-jitsu continues growing, I think it's a very important component of even jiu-jitsu. Like if we just even.
And there are people in the United States that are strong advocates for this, and they're going to be crucial. Guys like me who are double black belts, guys like Justin Flores, I'm sure you've heard of him. Travis Stevens, the double black belt, right? And there's all these guys who have double black belts who understand both sides of the sport. So now they're not teaching traditional judo, they're teaching judo for BJJ guys, right? So now more BJJ guys have access to judo. They're not going into a judo gym getting bombed. They're not learning big turn throws that take freaking 5 years to learn. They're learning judo that they could immediately implement in a jiu-jitsu setting, right? And once that happens and a lot of those guys start cross-training and training with guys who have dual experience, then it's going to get somewhere, right? Even wrestling 10 years ago, this is how you do a high crotch. Bang, head up and then head to the side. And then you learn from a wrestler and you get in guillotine.
Yep.
But now there's guys who wrestled, who have Brazilian jiu-jitsu experience, will teach you how not to get guillotined or how not to get kimura.
We've seen
when you're going for a single.
Yeah, we've seen this even here. I mean, we have wrestling coaches train with us to, better their skills so they can create an adaptation to where they coach, and it's that's the brilliant part about this, right? Cross training and really trying to understand what the benefits are and how we can improve all of this. So I do love it.
You know what would be ideal for me in an ideal world if I could have anything, if Genie came out and this is your one wish, maybe they're not my one wish, right? I'd probably do something different, but one wish in terms of grappling, if jiu-jitsu, it's a beautiful sport, they could ride the coattails of judo a little bit and get on sort of like an Olympic circuit, and have a similar structure. And then they have freestyle wrestling and Greco-Roman wrestling in the Olympics.
Yeah.
Why not have something similar where jiu-jitsu and judo kind of a hybrid thing? They have maybe 2 rule sets. This would be amazing, right? Because the infrastructure is already there in judo. They follow very closely to the same structure that international tennis has, with the Grand Slams, the Grand Prix, and the Continental Opens. And there's tons of money in international judo, right? Government funded. A lot of it comes from Russia and Putin and, the Romanian president, the IJF Visor. There's like casino money flowing into there's a lot of money in that world, and the infrastructure is already there. Perhaps maybe, there's a dual thing that's kind of symbiotic, because we do really come from the same place. We're both cousins, Judo and Jiu Jitsu are cousins, BJJ, right? We both ripped off Japanese jiu-jitsu. That's what we both did. You know what I mean? So we both have that same thing.
That's
We have
grandpa.
that in
We're
common.
cousins.
Do you feel that there's an opportunity for that happening? I mean, I feel like judo has very well established quote unquote system, and they are very protective of it. And there's this new kid on the block, jiu-jitsu, coming along, and kind of free flowing with minimal amount of rules and kind of, no organization to oversee it, and it's kind of shoot off the hip kind of sort of thing. Do you foresee some of this merging at some point?
Yes, because jiu-jitsu is going towards judo and judo is going towards jiu-jitsu in the United States. Even USA Judo was like, hey, let's implement the brown belt nationals. Let's implement a grappling division with like submission rule sets, right, to welcome jiu-jitsu in. And all the criticisms that jiu-jitsu did for judo with the thing, it's more of a sport than a martial art. Now they're doing it too, right? Masters can't do heel hooks, right? Knee reaping this. They're eventually going to ban, 50-50 guard and this and that. And they're going to start penalizing for stalling because they want to make it spectator friendly. And they should make it spectator friendly. You go to a jiu-jitsu tournament, no one's there just to watch jiu-jitsu, right?
Yes. You bring up a very valid point. Jiu-jitsu is not an entertainment sport. Judo is, right? And
it is, yeah. So little by little, judo is going in one direction in the United States, and jiu-jitsu is going in the opposite direction. So they might merge in the middle.
Yeah.
Would they say judo division? There might be a hybrid tournament that can potentially happen, and it's already kind of starting to pop up. I think it takes one or two key names in both communities to kind of like, for instance, Keenan Cornelius is a big name in jiu-jitsu, and he trains with Justin Flores, who was a Division I wrestler from Nebraska. I know him personally. He's a judo guy with a tremendous amount of judo success. He's a jiu-jitsu black belt. Those two guys getting together and doing something. Keenan was a green belt or something in judo, and now they're both, right? They have this thing. Maybe they run a hybrid tournament under a new rule set. Those guys are very, very influential in the community. Justin could pull in the judo guys, and Keenan could pull in the jiu-jitsu guys, and then now all of a sudden you have a big tournament, completely new rule set, right? That can potentially happen.
Yeah, and Justin was
I would like to see
Justin
it.
was a coach for the Olympic team last time, right? Wasn't he?
I think so. Yeah, World or Olympics.
I think so,
he's. I used to watch him, and he was incredible, dude. He was so good. Tomonage, wrestling, takedowns, submissions. He's really well rounded. I remember because I was a little bit younger than him. As I was coming onto the international circuit, he was already kind of peaking.
Established,
right? So it was amazing to watch him. He was like a true hybrid. And we need more of those guys who could throw, guys who could have good guards. We don't want one-sided guys who could take guys down and can only pass. We want guys who can.
That's right.
Right? We want skilled berimbolo rubber guard types who can also lift up and slam,
And I think what's also important is the fact that jiu-jitsu, in my opinion at least, is going through this huge evolution right now. Like we are at the pivot of growth. Like it's just exploding everywhere. And this is a good time really for this adaptation and some of these introductions to do take place. So when it grows, it really grows in the right direction. But you're right. Important names, important individuals are key to success like this and really, creating some kind of dynamic culture and cohesiveness between those two sports. So, I love it. Listen, before we start wrapping this up, what we always do at the end of every episode is we have a question for you from our previous guest. But he had no clue.
That's cool.
He had no clue who will be answering it. So think about it as, question completely in dark, and Gary's going to take a lead on this and always creates an interesting end to the conversation.
And this is kind of funny because as soon as we started the episode, I was like, oh, here comes the answer to the question. It was like right off the bat. So, but maybe we can encapsulate it a little bit. But Dirty Dozen member Rick Williams, his question is, over the past 30 years, the sport of jiu-jitsu/MMA has evolved dramatically. What do you think, or why do you think this has occurred? And how has your training changed to keep up with that evolution?
Interesting. I think the information age has a big portion in this, right? They're very responsible. Now with like people who are in the sport evolution wise, why it's really growing, the marketing message is a lot stronger in jiu-jitsu now, right? Hey guys, you could be 30, 40, you could have a family, you could come in and do this thing that's associated with UFC in a safe way, right? Everyone wants to be a fighter. Everyone wants to be a tough guy, especially if you're a male. You're lifting weights and you're like, you know what? I'm a tough guy, man. I'm not taking shit from nobody. Is he going to go in the cage and get his head punched off? Like, he has to go to work the next day? No. But there is this thing, jiu-jitsu, where you could take someone down and submit them, willingly submit them, and I could do it relatively safely, right? Now, all of a sudden, that guy's coming into the gym doing jiu-jitsu, and he could classify himself as a fighter, as a grappler, right? And he has ties to MMA, and he gets good at it in a safe way, right? And now he's accessing all the information from the best guys on this planet, mostly in the United States, right? Brazil and the United States were really at the mercy of the champions in the United States because they speak English, right? We're not listening to a Portuguese, Brazilian champion in Portuguese and trying to decipher. No, we're not doing that. We're listening to guys who have a good grasp of the English language, and we have access to that information, and we can bring it back to the gym and try it. You see? So, like, I think that is a key component, a strong marketing message from jiu-jitsu, right? They know who the demographic is, and I loved it that I asked, hey, who's your main demographic? And you nailed it. 35 to 45. Guys with families, right? Nailed it, right? So we know who we want, right? We know the bulk of it. There's products associated with it. And then there's information available to those guys to excel in it. And I think that is sort of the key to the jiu-jitsu growth, right? We know who we want. We know how they could stay around and how they can keep doing it. And it's very sticky because they have accessible champions to teach them, not just in the room, but online, seminars, et cetera, right?
Do you see the same amount of growth when it comes to judo as far as the digital age that we find ourselves in? And
no, not even close.
How come?
Because judo is a huge physical component to it, right? It's the equivalent of being in the room for Olympic lifting versus powerlifting or even bodybuilding. Anyone can do curls and get jacked. Anyone can do bench and get jacked. Olympic lifting, cleans, jerks, snatches, those require a lot of skill, a lot of technique, it's a lot more focused, right? With judo, you have to be strong, fast, agile. Technique has to be perfect. There's so many more criteria for a successful throw to take someone down, right? So it's a lot more difficult. You watch the videos. This is how you do a tile. This is how you do a big uchimata. It's so hard to do it because you lose your balance, it's gone, right? You don't accelerate through the motion, it's gone. If there's not constant tension on the head downward and he postures his head up, it's gone, right? So you're doing it over and over, you're getting countered. You can't just watch a video and have success. As opposed to, if you're watching the knee cut, knee shield thing, you go to the gym, you're going against a blue belt, and you can immediately implement that and have some level of success with it, right? So the instructionals, I think, favor jiu-jitsu a little bit more because physicality is much less important in Brazilian jiu-jitsu than judo, I think.
No, I don't think anybody can argue with that.
Yeah, I don't think anybody can argue with that. I mean, it is what it is, and I think that's the diversity between the two different sports or two different activities. It really, even though they are so close, they are so different, and even from rules engagement, right? I mean, like I often tell my students, your shoulders touch the ground and it's over in judo, right? It's done, right? And versus in jiu-jitsu, we just starting. So it's very different rules of engagement, very different environment.
And it's a good thing for jiu-jitsu, right? Because you guys are a little bit older, but you could take a young 23-year-old savage, 6'2", shredded. You could take him down, and then you could submit them.
Yeah,
with skill, right? Judo, you put him in a gi. It's like, all right, he knows a little bit of wrestling. It's tough because every athlete is good at staying on their feet. That the whole game is staying on your feet. Basketball, soccer, maybe not soccer. Football, baseball. You got to stay on your feet. Everyone's agile and explosive on their feet. You got to take them down. It's very difficult, I think,
I love it.
So good and bad in both directions.
Always, right? It's life. I suppose that's part of the life, right? Before we start wrapping this up, if anybody wants to connect with you directly, where can they find you? Are you on websites, social media? Share a little bit more about you.
I have a Judo Shintaro NYC on Instagram. Judo and Shintaro NYC. You could find me there. I have some clips on there. That's nice. I have a YouTube channel.
You do. It's quite big and present. I love it. I've been following it for a long time. So
thank you. So you could find me there, and then those are the two main ones.
All right. Well, phenomenal. As always, I appreciate you being here. I love the perspective, one from the historical side, sharing with your childhood and your father, and then all the growing up parts of judo, and then reaching out through all the different arts. That's so phenomenal. So I appreciate you being here. Keep up great work with everything you do.
Thank you
like
very
I
much.
said, I've been a big fan of yours for a long time. So keep on doing it. You definitely give me a lot of stimulation from what I'm as I've been watching you, Gary.
Yeah, thanks for everything. Thanks for your time. Thanks for dealing with the little hiccup we had here halfway through and sticking around. And all that father-son stuff. It means a lot. I got a little boy, and it hits home. So I appreciate that too.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Let's wrap it up for today.
All right, peace.
Later.
Thank you for listening to RŌL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.